If you were a Sega fan way back in the mid-1990s, you'll no doubt remember the ageless, weightless legend that was the Virtua Fighter series. Based in part on bleeding-edge military-grade graphics hardware designed by a company spun off from Lockheed Martin, of all people, its arcade iterations were considered the pinnacle of real-time 3D graphics at that time. Blazing trails, guzzling coins, and making everything else look decidedly shite in the process. Virtua Fighter loomed over the video game landscape of that time. Super powered, super advanced, and super unobtainable. And therein lay its magic. The prospect of getting a home port that was even in the same ballpark as the arcade original seemed like a pipe dream back in 1994, but Sega had a damn good go at it with Virtua Fighter and Virtua Fighter 2 for the 32X and the Sega Saturn. Their graphics were simplified, particularly in the case of Virtua Fighter 2, but their wonderful game mechanics were translated perfectly, and many Sega fans, myself included, absolutely loved them. I read the official Saturn magazine pretty religiously back in those days, and throughout the Saturn's life there was frequent discussion about what Yu Suzuki and the AM2 team were going to come up with for Virtua Fighter 3. This was an era in which 3D graphics developed at a quite staggering speed, and the shift from Virtua Fighter 1 to Virtua Fighter 2 illustrated this perfectly. They looked absolutely incredible for their day, so what the hell was Virtua Fighter 3 going to look like? For the sake of contrast, let's take a moment to look back at the most advanced real-time 3D graphics available to consumers in 1996. Virtua Fighter 2 had been a full generation, if not more, ahead of the competition at launch. When its initial tech demo was displayed at the AOU show in 1996, Virtua Fighter 3 looked like it had leapfrogged another two. In fact, the visuals on display here looked like they'd just skipped in from another dimension altogether. So how are these incredible graphics achieved? Well, with the Sega Model 3 arcade board. In late 1995, Yu Suzuki promised that the Model 3 would deliver the best 3D graphics, and given the man's track record, we absolutely believed him. The Model 3 hardware is very different to the Sega Model 1 and Model 2 boards, which preceded it. The Model 3 utilised Real 3D Pro 1000 graphics processing units, designed by Real 3D in partnership with Mitsubishi. The Model 3 was designed to push as many textured polygons as possible in real time, along with the most advanced graphical techniques available at that time, such as multi-sample anti-aliasing, motion blur, facial animation, specular highlighting / reflection / shading, and multiple light sources. As with the Model 1 and Model 2 arcade boards, upon release the Model 3 board was far more powerful than any other arcade platform on the market, as well as any other home console or computer. In fact, it took several years for home systems to catch up.
Fight 1, ready, go! Excellent! Yeah! All right! Fight 2, ready, go!
Better run home to Mama now.
Fight 3, ready, go!
So what about the game itself? Well, it's a unique game within the Virtua Fighter series and has a bit of a black sheep status with a significant section of the fanbase. It stands alone with its inclusion of an evade button, and it marked the end of one evolutionary branch of the series before it became a more hardcore concern with Virtua Fighter 4. Compared to the more modern titles, the movesets of Virtua Fighter 3 are simpler and more stripped back. The arenas, with their staggered floors, place a new emphasis on stance and posture. As a general rule, the undulating arenas did not go down terribly well with hardcore players. I am not a high-level Virtua Fighter player by any means, and actually, I really like them. And I really, really like this game. There is a speed, a flow, and an unpredictability about Virtua Fighter 3 that I absolutely love, and the enemy AI is much improved over its predecessors. In single-player mode, at least, it is by far the most fun of the Virtua Fighter titles, in my humble opinion. It stands as the last example of Sega's fighting game series when it was well and truly in the mainstream. It's quirky, and it's a little flawed, but by God is it ambitious, bold, beautiful, and intricate. All of the things I love about the Sega of the 90s and early 2000s.
Fight 1, ready, go!
Faster than lightning!
Fight 2, ready, go!
What about the home ports? Well, Sega abandoned its plans for a so-called impossible port to its Sega Saturn console, but as the fabled Sega Dreamcast emerged on the horizon, Sega announced that it would be there at launch.
10年早いんだよ。
本物だけが生き残るバーチャファイター 3TV
Dreamcast!
So how did it turn out? Well, contrary to popular belief, the Dreamcast version is in fact very good. The console had a very different architecture to the Model 3, and this presented a challenge to the developers. The Dreamcast was designed essentially to be a cheaper, if slightly faster, solution to the Model 3. Unfortunately, the Dreamcast, although faster on paper, was in practice often outpaced by the Model 3. Dreamcast is a bit more modern, technologically speaking, and some of its effects offer more flexibility in terms of lighting, shadows, and fog. It has more transparency levels, TC, and the like. It uses triangles instead of Model 3's quads, which makes things simpler and less computationally expensive. But the Sega Model 3's ROM architecture offers vastly more raw horsepower. Looking at the games side by side, the thing that immediately jumps out to me is the reduction in texture quality, and the lack of the Model 3's anti-aliasing solution makes a difference also. But other than that, it's certainly very close. The Dreamcast also rendered the game at 480p as opposed to the arcade's 384p, which was a significant bump up. The Dreamcast version is slightly less impressive. However, the fact that they squeezed this monstrous $20,000 behemoth into a £200 little white box some 2 years after its initial release is absolutely remarkable in hindsight, and most importantly, the gameplay is fantastic and absolutely true to the arcade. This would be the last time that an arcade system would be designed from the ground up to be the most amazing thing on the planet. If you play them in 16:9 of 4K resolution using the Super Model emulator, say, its games still hold up remarkably well today. To think that Sega Rally 2, for example, was released in 1998 is quite amazing. Sega followed up the Model 3 with the Sega Naomi, and then the Dreamcast. These were powerful systems indeed for their time, but were more of a sideways step when compared to the Model 3. The Naomi used a cartridge-based system, enabling arcade operators to simply swap their games over, rather than investing in a completely different and very expensive cabinet. It was a move away from costly, bespoke, and awesomely powerful hardware towards a slightly more efficient, cost-effective solution. The Naomi was also essentially identical to Sega's home console, the Dreamcast, and that enabled us to experience essentially arcade-perfect conversions of many, many Naomi games. This was a great thing indeed, and probably a wise decision on Sega's part, but just imagine what Sega could have come up with if it had carried on along this path. I mean, this thing came out 25 years ago, for God's sake. For many, many years, the arcade was home to the most bleeding-edge video game technology available to man, and the home market was a distant second. In this light, there's a pretty strong argument that the Sega Model 3 and its games were the ultimate product of the arcade. The technological arms race between Namco and Sega reached quite preposterous levels with the release of Virtua Fighter 3 and the amusingly titled Scud Race. But this turned out to be the arcade's high watermark. Never again would an arcade machine utterly smoke anything that was available in the home. The video game landscape was changing rapidly, and the emphasis was increasingly on home consoles and the PC. For many years now, arcade games are based on what are essentially consumer PCs, and gone are the days when the arcade led the way, when the arcade could show you things you hadn't really thought possible. And that's why this game, and the other two original Virtua Fighter games, hold a special place in my heart. It's also why I parted with the cash to buy a Model 3 arcade board, despite having far better things to spend the money on. Virtua Fighter 3 is also the last time that the great Yu Suzuki was the absolute driving force of a game in the Virtua Fighter series. He took half a step back with the absolutely excellent Virtua Fighter 4. There's a slight shift in aesthetic within the games at this point, and although absolutely all mainline Virtua Fighter games have been utterly and completely excellent, there is something special about the original 3, in my opinion. Virtua Fighter 3, the black sheep of the series it may be, but when I boot up this game, I'm transported back to that fateful day in 1996 when I stepped inside Coral Island Arcade in Blackpool, UK, saw this thing in full flow for the very first time, and felt like I'd landed on Mars. Or was it Saturn?